Think about the last time you were somewhere completely cut off from everything. No signal, no people, no way to call for help, and you realized, somewhere in the back of your mind, that if something went wrong out there, nobody would know. Nobody would come. That specific feeling, that gut-level awareness. That is where all three of these stories begin. Story 1. Greer's Point. My name is Nate. I was 26 years old when my buddy Cole talked me into a kayaking trip off the coast of Maine. Just the two of us. 3 days. A small island about 4 miles offshore called Greer's Point. It was not a popular destination. No rangers. No tourists. No cell service. That was kind of the whole appeal. Cole had been out there once before with his uncle and said it was the most peaceful place he had ever been. Tall pines, a rocky shoreline, a freshwater stream cutting through the center of the island. We packed light, 2 tents, 4 days of food, a hand-crank weather radio, and a basic first aid kit. The first day was everything we had hoped for. We made landfall around noon and set up camp near the tree line. Spent the afternoon walking the perimeter. The whole island was maybe 40 acres. You could walk the full edge in under 2 hours. Near the southern end, we found an old fire pit and some rusted tin cans half buried in the dirt. Cole said his uncle had mentioned other kayakers used the island occasionally. Nothing unusual about that. We ate dinner as the sun went down, talked about nothing important, and turned in around 10. I remember lying in my tent, listening to the water move against the rocks, and thinking this was exactly what I needed. I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of Cole unzipping my tent. He crouched at the entrance with his flashlight pointed at the ground and did not say anything right away. I had known Cole since we were kids. I had never seen him look the way he looked in that moment. Like he was working very hard to stay calm and not quite managing it. He told me there was a boat anchored about 100 yards offshore. No running lights. Just sitting out there in the dark. I told him it was probably just someone anchored for the night. Happens all the time on the water. He said, yeah, maybe. And then he told me the rest of it. He had gotten up to use the bathroom, and on his way back, he had seen a light on the boat. Not a running light, a flashlight or lantern. Something handheld, moving around below deck. While he was standing there watching it, the light went out, and then he heard something enter the water between the boat and the shore. We stood at the edge of the tree line together and listened. The water was calm that night, almost no wind, and I heard it. A low, rhythmic sound. Something moving through the water at a slow and deliberate pace. Not a fish, not a bird. It had a pattern to it. We killed our flashlights and moved back into the trees. Here is what you need to understand about that moment. There was no calling for help. The weather radio only received NOAA broadcasts. Our kayaks were pulled up on the North Beach, which meant anyone coming in from the south would reach our campsite before we could reach the water. We had no signal flares, no air horn. Cole had a folding knife. I had a hatchet I had brought for firewood. That was the full extent of what we had. We made a decision fast. We grabbed what we could carry. Food, water, the radio, emergency gear. And we moved deeper into the island toward a rocky outcropping near the center that we had spotted during our hike the day before. Elevated ground. A natural wall of boulders on 2 sides. From the highest point, you could see back toward the campsite. We sat there in the dark without speaking for what felt like hours. At some point, Cole grabbed my arm and pointed toward camp. There was a light moving through it, slow and methodical. Tent to tent. Taking its time. I watched it stop at my tent for a long moment. Then it moved to Cole's tent. Then it went dark. We stayed on that rock until the sky started going gray. We did not sleep. We did not talk. We barely moved. When we came down at first light, we went straight to the North Beach, put the kayaks in the water, and paddled. I did not look back for the first half mile. When I finally did, the island was already small behind us. The boat was gone. What we found back at camp before we left told part of the story. Our food bags had been opened. Not ripped. Opened carefully, like someone was looking inside rather than taking from them. A dry bag where I kept my wallet and cards had been moved. The wallet was still there, but it had been unzipped. Cole's tent had been gone through. His backpack turned over. The police report went nowhere. No description. No boat registration. No witnesses. An officer mentioned there had been a few similar incidents in that area over the years. Campers on the smaller islands reporting strange encounters. He said it like it was background information. Like it was not the most unsettling thing I had ever heard, if Cole had not woken up. If he had not looked toward the water at exactly the right moment, we would have been in those tents, asleep, completely unaware, while a stranger moved through our camp in the dark. I do not go to uninhabited islands anymore. And if you are the kind of person who thinks that kind of trip sounds like a good idea, I would sit with that thought for a while. Because the appeal of going somewhere nobody can find you cuts both ways. Nobody could find us either. Story 2. The Notebook. This happened 3 summers ago. I was 26 and working a seasonal position with a small environmental research team based out of Oregon. The assignment was straightforward on paper. 5 days on a privately owned island off the coast of Washington State. 4 of us, cataloging plant growth and water quality along the shoreline. 1 motorboat. 1 satellite phone. Enough food for the week. The island was not on most maps. That is not a figure of speech. It was small enough and far enough from the main shipping routes that it barely had a name. The company that owned it used it for occasional research and nothing else. No permanent structures except a single weathered cabin near the center with basic equipment and bunk beds. We arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The boat ride out took almost 2 hours, and by the time we reached shore, the mainland had completely disappeared behind the fog. I remember standing on the rocky beach, looking out at gray water in every direction, and feeling something I could not immediately name. Not fear exactly, more like the specific awareness of how small you actually are. The first 2 days were uneventful. We worked the shoreline in pairs, logged our data, ate canned food at the cabin, slept fine. The island was quiet in the way that only truly uninhabited places are. No distant traffic, no music, no voices, just wind and water and birds. On the 3rd morning, my colleague Ben and I found the second campsite. We were not looking for it. We were cutting through the interior of the island toward the north shore when Ben almost tripped over a metal stake driven into the ground. We stopped and looked around. There were 4 stakes total, arranged in a rough rectangle, the shape of a tent footprint. The grass inside the rectangle was compressed and dead, flattened from weight. 2 empty tin cans sat near the tree line. A small fire ring had been built from stones pulled from the creek nearby. Someone had been here recently. The ash in the fire ring was still pale gray, not darkened from rain. One of the cans still had moisture inside. Ben and I did not say much. We took photographs, went back to the cabin, and told the others. Our team lead, a woman named Sandra, got on the satellite phone immediately and called the main office to ask whether anyone else had authorized access to the island. She was on for almost 20 minutes. When she came back inside, she told us the answer was no. No other teams, no contractors, no scheduled maintenance. Nobody else should have been on that island. Sandra decided we would finish the assignment. We were close to halfway done. The weather was holding. She reasoned that whoever had camped there was likely long gone. Probably a fisherman or someone who had found the island on their own and left before we arrived. It was a reasonable conclusion. But that night, I could not sleep. I lay in the top bunk staring at the wood above me, listening to the wind work through the cabin's old walls. The moisture inside that kept pulling at me. That detail would not leave me alone. I got up around 2 in the morning to use the outhouse. It was about 30 feet behind the cabin, just inside the tree line. I took a flashlight, went out the back door, and crossed the clearing. On my way back, I stopped. There was a light on the north end of the island. Not a reflection off the water, not the moon. A steady, dim yellowish glow, low to the ground, like a lantern. And it was moving, slowly, methodically, parallel to the shoreline. I stood in the dark and watched it for about 30 seconds. Then it stopped. Then it was gone. I went back inside and woke Sandra. I brought her to the back window. We stood there together in silence for almost a full minute. The light did not reappear. She told me lack of sleep does things to your perception, and that I had probably seen a reflection. I almost let myself believe her. The next morning I walked to the North Shore alone. I told myself I was just checking. I did not know what I expected to find. What I found was a dry bag wedged into a gap between two large rocks just above the tide line. Deliberately positioned, hidden unless you were standing close enough to look directly at it. I crouched down and opened it with my gloves on. Inside, 2 energy bar wrappers, a folded tarp, a compact water filter, a small first aid kit, and a spiral notebook. I opened the notebook. Most of it was written in abbreviations I could not fully read. Times, numbers, what might have been coordinates. But the last 3 pages were written in full sentences. The handwriting was tight and controlled. I did not read every word. I read enough. Whoever had been on that island had been watching us, not passively. The notes described our schedule in detail. What time we left the cabin each morning, which direction each of us walked, which of us went out alone, and at what time. The last page had 4 labels on it, 1 for each member of our team. They were not our names, but there were exactly 4 of them. I put the notebook back, marked the GPS location, and walked back to the cabin. I do not know how I did not run. Every part of me wanted to. Sandra made the call to leave, without argument, the moment I showed her the coordinates and told her what I had found. We packed in under an hour and got on the boat. The satellite phone was used to contact the Coast Guard before we were halfway back to the mainland. The Coast Guard searched the island 2 days later. They found the campsite, the fire ring, the dry bag. No person. Nobody was ever identified. The case went quiet. The company permanently shut down access to the island, which was the only honest acknowledgement I ever received that what happened out there was real. The part that stays with me is not the light at 2 in the morning. It is not the notebook or the names. It is the fact that we were out there for 3 days before we found any of it. 3 days of working that shoreline believing we were completely alone. Story 3. The Tin Cup. My buddy Derek had a boat. Nothing fancy. A 22-foot aluminum fishing vessel he had inherited after his father passed. Every summer the 2 of us took it out on Lake Superior for a long weekend. Just us, fishing rods, and enough food to last 3 days. No phones. No signal. No people. That was the entire point. The summer I am talking about, Derek had found a spot on the map he had not noticed before. A small island. Not even labeled on most charts. Maybe a quarter-mile long. He said it had a protected cove on the eastern side that would be perfect for anchoring overnight. I did not ask questions. Derek knew that lake better than anyone I had ever met. We left the marina on a Friday morning. The water was flat, and the sky was that clean deep blue you only get in late July. The island came into view about 4 hours later. I remember thinking it looked almost too perfect. Dense pine trees. Rocky shoreline. Not a single structure visible from the water. We circled it once before pulling into the cove. That is when I noticed the other boat. It was tucked back against the tree line, partially hidden by overhanging branches. Old wooden hull. Peeling paint. It looked like it had not moved in a long time. But the anchor line going into the water was clean. No algae. Someone had been using it at least occasionally. Derek said it was probably an abandoned vessel that someone had tied off there years ago. I wanted to believe that. We anchored about 60 feet away and started setting up camp on the shore. The first night was everything we had come out there for. We caught 3 walleye, cooked them over a fire, and went to sleep in our tents by 10. I slept hard. No noise, no wind. Nothing. The second day was when things started to shift. We were fishing off the eastern point of the island around noon when Derek went quiet mid-sentence. I looked up, and he was staring at the tree line. I asked what was wrong. He said he thought he saw something move in there. I looked. Just trees and shadow. I told him it was probably a deer. He nodded, but did not say much else for a while. That evening, I went to refill our water container from a small freshwater stream on the island's interior. Maybe 200 yards into the woods from camp. I found the stream, filled the container, and was heading back when I noticed something on a flat rock near the bank. A tin cup. Clean. Not rusted. Not weathered. Sitting upright like someone had just set it down. I stood there looking at it for longer than I probably should have. Then, I picked it up and carried it back to camp. Derek turned it over in his hands without speaking for a moment. Then he said, "Someone has been here recently." We both looked at the old boat across the cove. The anchor line was the same. Nothing visible had changed. But something between us had shifted, and neither of us could quite put it back. We did not talk much after that. I woke up at 2 in the morning, without knowing why. No sound, no movement. My eyes just opened, and I was fully awake. The specific kind of awake that happens before you understand what your brain has already decided, requires your attention. I lay still and listened. And then I heard it. A door. Not a tent zipper, not a branch. The unmistakable sound of a wooden door, closing firmly and deliberately somewhere in the trees behind our camp. There was a structure in those woods. There had to be. And someone was inside it. I woke Derek as quietly as I could and told him what I had heard. He grabbed the flashlight. I grabbed the fillet knife. The only thing we had that could serve as any kind of defense. We sat in the dark of Derek's tent for about 20 minutes without moving. Nothing else came. No voices. No footsteps. Just water against rocks and our own breathing. We made the decision without discussing it. We packed up camp in the dark. Everything into bags. Bags into the boat. We pulled anchor and moved out of that cove without turning on our running lights until we were clear of the island. Neither of us said a word for the first hour on the water. When Derek finally spoke, all he said was the tin cup. Nobody just leaves a clean cup in the woods. He was right. And I had been turning that over since the moment I picked it up. Someone had placed it there recently, and they would have seen us arrive, seen us set up camp, seen us moving around the shore. They knew we were there the whole time, and they chose to stay hidden. That is the part I still cannot let go of. Because there are only a few reasons a person hides on an unnamed island and watches strangers without ever making a sound, and not one of those reasons is something you want to think about for too long. When we got back to the marina, Derek called the county sheriff's department and gave them the coordinates. An officer said they would look into it. We never heard back. I searched local news for weeks afterward. Nothing. I do not know who was on that island. I do not know what that structure was, or how long someone had been living inside it, or what they were doing out there. What I know is that we were there for almost 2 full days. We swam in that cove. We built fires at night. We slept on that shore. And the whole time, we were being watched. I used to love the idea of finding a place nobody else knew about. That feeling is gone now. Because here is the truth that nobody tells you about places that do not show up on maps. The coves that feel too quiet. The islands that look too perfect from a distance. There is usually a reason nobody goes there. That is Nate, a field researcher who asked not to be named, and one more person who went looking for somewhere quiet. 3 people who found exactly that. And something else living inside the quiet that was already there when they arrived. If their stories stayed with you, make sure you are subscribed to the Chamber Files right now. New first-hand accounts drop every single week from real people who need someone else to know what happened to them. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. And if something has happened to you, on the water, in the woods, somewhere remote that did not turn out to be empty, send it to us. The address is thechamberfiles@gmail.com. We read every single submission. We will see you in the next one, if you are still awake. Welcome to the Chamber Files. Every account you are about to hear was submitted to us by a real person. These are not dramatizations. These are not campfire stories somebody half remembered. These are first-hand experiences, sent to us by people who needed someone else to know what happened to them. Tonight, Three people share what happened in three very different places, at three very different moments in their lives, when something crossed the line from strange into something they could not explain and could not forget. These are their words. Story 1. The Trees in Panama. My name is Cole. I am from Georgia. And I want to say up front that I am not the kind of person who makes things up for attention. I have told this story to maybe 5 people total, and every single time I lose something trying to explain it. Because the part that scared me most was not just what I saw. It was that my brain could not make it make sense, and it still cannot. Me and 3 friends had been talking for a while about taking a trip somewhere outside the country. None of us had really traveled before beyond Florida vacations growing up. My friend Danny had an uncle who had retired in Panama years earlier and owned some property out there. A house that family friends used occasionally when they needed somewhere to stay. I did not want to go at first. Money was tight for me, and I have always hated flying. I know people say statistically it is the safest way to travel, but something about being sealed in a metal tube thousands of feet in the air for hours has never sat right with me. My brain does not care about statistics when we are at cruising altitude. But Danny kept saying this was probably the cheapest international trip any of us would ever get to take, so I saved up over a couple of months and went. We stayed near Panama City at first. A crowded area with bars and restaurants and tourist activity. Loud music at night. Humid air that stuck to everything. I liked it more than I expected. Everybody seemed relaxed in a way that was contagious. We walked around, ate food, drank too much, and acted like guys in their 20s who had finally escaped work for a week. Danny's uncle had a second property farther from the city, somewhere up in a more rural area. I could not tell you exactly where because Danny was navigating and I was not paying attention to the roads. I just remember them getting narrower, less pavement, less people. At one point, I noticed houses tucked way back in heavy trees, barely visible from the road unless you were looking directly at them. The drive took a long time because it had rained earlier and some of the roads were muddy. We stopped at a tiny roadside place for drinks and snacks, and I remember stray dogs lying underneath the outdoor tables because the shade kept them cool. The house was not creepy when we first got there. 1 story, metal roof, wraparound porch, screened windows, old outdoor furniture that had been sitting in the sun long enough to lose most of its color. Trees everywhere around it, dense, layered trees. The kind where you could not see more than a few feet into them before the green swallowed the light. The sounds at night out there were unlike anything I had ever heard. I do not even know what half of them were. Back home, nights eventually quiet down. Out there, everything stayed alive all night. Every insect, every animal, every branch. The first night, I barely slept. We spent a couple of days out there grilling, drinking, swimming in a muddy little river nearby, and doing nothing important. One afternoon, we drove into a small town for groceries, and Danny's uncle somehow knew half the people there. The night it happened, everyone else was inside playing cards and drinking. I had been losing money because I am genuinely bad at cards, and Danny kept accusing me of pretending not to know the rules even though I did not. The power flickered a few times, because apparently storms out there regularly messed with the electricity. At some point, my phone caught enough signal to actually send texts. Service around that property was almost non-existent. You would randomly get 1 bar in certain spots outside and then lose it again immediately. I wanted to call my sister because she had been worried about the trip and I had not spoken to her in a couple of days. So I stepped outside. Everything smelled wet. Dirt and plants and something else underneath it all that I could not name. I walked around the side of the house, holding my phone up occasionally, because that is the thing people do even though it almost never helps. I eventually got a single bar near a clearing off to the left side of the property. Not a true clearing, more like a place where the trees were slightly less packed together than everywhere else. I had just heard my sister's phone start ringing when something hit my left leg. That is the only way I can describe it. Like getting snapped hard with a rubber band, combined with a sudden sting. I yelped out loud and almost dropped my phone. My first thought was that something large had bitten me because there were huge insects out there. I grabbed my thigh and looked down. Then something moved in the branches directly above me. I looked up. What I saw is the part I have the hardest time explaining. Even now, there was something pale sitting up in the trees, maybe 6 or 8 feet above my head. The moonlight was hitting it strangely through the branches, which is part of why it took my brain a moment to understand the shape I was looking at. My first instinct was that it was a child. Something about the size registered that way. And it was looking directly at me. I remember opening my mouth to say something, because my first thought was genuinely, how did a kid get up there? Then I realized the shape was wrong. The left side of the body, or maybe the right from my angle, was not there the way it should have been. I thought at first that branches were covering parts of it. But then, it shifted slightly. And I saw it clearly. There was one arm gripping the tree, no second arm. No legs hanging down. Nothing. I understand how that sounds. Trust me. That is exactly why it scared me as badly as it did. Because my brain could not process what my eyes were telling it. The face looked pale and thin and completely still. And it never blinked. Not once while I was looking at it. People always ask me later if it could have been someone injured. Someone hiding, a sick person who had climbed up there somehow. But no normal person sits motionless in a tree at night staring down at a stranger, without making a sound. And there were no legs, nothing hanging below the body. There was no way to reconcile what I was seeing with anything I had a category for. Then, I heard a sound from it. Soft, deliberate. Like someone gently clicking their teeth together in a slow rhythm. I slipped in the mud. My phone fell somewhere in the grass, and I left it. I ran straight back toward the house, yelling for Danny. I hit the porch railing sideways, trying to get up the steps fast enough, and it knocked the wind out of me. Once I was inside under lights with other people around, my brain started trying to convince me I had imagined it. But my leg still hurt. I pulled my shorts up, and there was a long red mark across my thigh. Not a bite mark, more like something thin had grazed me sideways across the skin. 3 of us went back out with flashlights. Our other friend stayed inside near the door, telling us not to be idiots. We found my phone in the grass and walked back to where I had been standing. Nothing was there, nothing moving in the branches above. Danny shone his flashlight up into the trees and pointed out that the branches in that area were far thinner than I had realized. Too thin to hold even a small person's weight without snapping everything around them. I did not tell him about the missing limbs right then. I waited until we were back inside, because I was scared of saying it out loud in the dark. When I finally described exactly what I had seen, the room went quiet. Our friend Marcus thought I had seen an animal with mange. Danny suggested maybe a monkey that had lost limbs to traps somewhere in the forest. But neither of those explanations matched what I saw. I know what a monkey looks like. This had a human face. Too still, too deliberate, too aware of me standing below it. By morning, I already knew I needed to leave. Something about that experience had completely broken my ability to stay there. Everyone else kept acting like I had probably just frightened myself in the dark, but even Danny admitted I seemed genuinely shaken, and he had known me since middle school. I am not normally the dramatic one in any situation. They wanted to continue the vacation for a few more days. I told them I was leaving. Not in an emotional way, more in the flat, quiet way you get when you are scared enough that the emotion burns off, and what is left is just certainty. Danny offered to drive me back toward the city so I could catch an earlier flight. On the way back, the roads turned to mud again in the rain. We passed a small roadside cemetery with bright fake flowers and painted crosses crowded near the road. An older man stood near the entrance smoking, watching our truck pass the entire time. I turned around and kept watching him through the rear window until the road curved and he disappeared. Then Danny asked me something. He said, "When you saw it, are you sure it was looking at you?" I said yes. Obviously. He admitted then that his uncle had mentioned things in the woods near that property before. He would not tell me the specifics. He said his uncle drank heavily and believed all kinds of local stories, so Danny had never taken it seriously. He had not mentioned it before the trip because he thought it was just old man talk. I sat in that gas station parking lot sweating through my shirt, even though the rain had cooled everything down. There were mountains far off in the distance, half hidden in fog. And for the first time since we had arrived, the whole place felt very far from anything I understood. Like I was somewhere with rules I had not been told about. And something out there already knew I did not belong. I caught the earliest flight home I could afford. I have not been back. Story 2. The Park. I was living out of my car for a little over 6 months back in 2019. I want to be upfront about that because people get a certain look on their face when you say it, like they are already deciding what kind of person you must be. The truth is, I had just lost my apartment. My hours got cut at work, my roommate moved in with his girlfriend, and both things happened close enough together that I did not have time to adjust before I was already behind. I was still working the whole time. A job at a storage property outside a small town in Oregon, closer to the coast. Dense trees, constant rain, the kind of gray sky that sits so low it feels like a ceiling. I had a routine. Work until 5, sometimes later if someone had moved out of a unit and left things behind for me to clear. Then shower at a cheap gym in town. Then figure out where I was sleeping. You learn things fast living like that. Which grocery store parking lots do not check on cars overnight? Which gas stations leave their bathrooms unlocked? Which lots have security patrols and which ones never do? I got decent at the math of it. Most nights I stayed near busier areas because it felt safer to have other people around. But every once in a while, the noise and the headlights and the random knocks on the window from strangers asking for cigarettes or money would wear me down. On those nights, I would drive somewhere quiet. That night was one of those nights. My shift had been rough because a storage unit had flooded from rain earlier that week, and an older man had screamed at me like I was personally responsible for the weather. After work, I drove north on a smaller highway lined with trees. No real destination in mind, just driving. I stopped for coffee at a gas station and kept going. There was a wooded day-use recreation area I knew about from before things had fallen apart financially. Trails, picnic tables, a creek nearby. Families came during summer days. At night, it was empty. Technically, you were not supposed to stay overnight, but there were no gates, so I pulled in around 9:30. The parking area was not large. Maybe room for 15 or 20 cars, curving slightly around tall trees so that parts of it disappeared into darkness fast once you moved away from the entrance. There was an old bathroom building with concrete walls. I could hear water somewhere in the trees. I reclined my seat and watched things on my phone to pass time before sleeping. I did that every night because the alternative was lying there thinking too much. Around 11, someone moved past my windshield. A young woman. Dark hair. Light gray hoodie. Moving fast across the parking lot, the way people move when they are trying not to look like they are running, but everything in their body wants to. She kept looking behind herself. My windows were fogged from the cold, and I had no interior lights on, so I do not think she noticed my car at first. She stopped near the trail entrance and looked back toward the parking lot entrance one more time. Her whole posture was wrong. Not someone who had just had an argument. Someone who was frightened and trying to control it. Then she went into the woods. I sat up. A minute later, a second woman appeared from the other side of the parking lot near the bathrooms. I had not heard a vehicle arrive. I had not seen anyone else there when I pulled in. She was older. A long, dark coat that looked expensive compared to everything else in that parking lot. Blonde or gray hair. She moved slower than the younger woman had, but her eyes were scanning everything around her with a focused, searching quality. She spotted my car and walked toward it, close enough that I got nervous she was going to knock on the glass. She stopped maybe 10 feet away and asked if I had seen a girl come through. I cracked the window. Her voice was controlled. Too controlled. The kind of calm that sits on top of something else and does not quite hide it. I told her yes, that someone had just gone toward the trail a few minutes ago. She nodded quickly, told me her daughter had gotten upset and run off. I do not know how to explain why I immediately did not believe her. It was not one specific thing. It was the sum of it. The younger woman had not looked like someone in the middle of a family argument. She had looked like someone trying to get away from something. The age gap between the two women felt off. The way the older woman had appeared from nowhere. The coat. The forced calm that kept slipping at the edges. I asked if she wanted me to call someone. She said no immediately. Then, she smiled at me, and the smile looked like something she had remembered to do, rather than something that happened naturally. Like watching a person recall the correct expression mid-conversation. She thanked me, and walked toward the trail entrance, and disappeared into the trees. I stayed sitting upright, watching the trail entrance through the windshield. The park was completely quiet, except for wind and water somewhere deeper in the trees. I told myself maybe I had turned a family argument into something it was not. Maybe I was alone in the dark, making connections that were not real. I almost talked myself into lying back down. Then headlights swept across the parking lot. A black SUV. New. Clean. The kind of vehicle that looked completely out of place in a day-use park at 11 at night. It stopped a few spaces from me and sat with the engine running for a minute before 3 people got out. The older woman was one of them. A man around 30 was another. The third was bigger, and stayed near the SUV initially, while the other 2 argued quietly beside the passenger door. I could hear the tone without making out the words. Tense. Clipped. The older woman pointed toward the woods at one point. The younger woman was not with them. I lowered myself in the seat. My windows were fogged enough that I thought they probably could not see me clearly through the glass. Then, the bigger man stopped moving. He said something to the others and started walking toward my car. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the seat like I was asleep. I slowed my breathing. The footsteps crossed the gravel and stopped directly outside my driver's window. I could hear someone breathing on the other side of the glass. He stood there for several seconds. Then, he tapped lightly on the window. I did not move. The footsteps eventually moved away. I opened my eyes enough to see all 3 of them walking toward the trail entrance. Flashlights now. No one looked back toward my car. I should have left then. I know that. But I sat frozen for another minute trying to decide if I was overreacting. Because when you are living out of your car and sleeping in a park illegally, and you call the police over something that turns out to be nothing, you spend the rest of the night explaining yourself to cops at 1 in the morning. I watched the flashlight beams moving through the trees, little flashes between trunks. They were not talking. At least not loud enough to hear from where I was parked. I put my key in the ignition and started the engine. The second the engine turned over, both flashlight beams immediately swung toward the parking lot. One of the men came out of the tree line fast, shining his light directly at my windshield. I could not see his face because of the glare, but I could see his outline clearly. He raised one hand toward me like he wanted me to stop. I did not stop. He started yelling. Behind him, the older woman came out of the trail entrance. She looked angry now. Fully angry in a way she had not shown before, and there was still no sign of the younger woman. There were almost no other cars on the road at that hour. I drove until I hit a town with gas station lights and other people around, and I sat in that parking lot until my hands stopped shaking. I have never been able to stop thinking about the younger woman, about the way she moved across that parking lot, about where she went in those woods, about what the 3 people who came looking for her were planning to do when they found her. I do not know what happened that night. I do not know if she got out. I do not know if those people found her. To this day, it is the thing I think about most when the night gets quiet enough. Desperate. That is the word that fits her. She looked desperate. Story 3. The Man in the Yard. My name is Haley. I moved back in with my dad in late 2021 after my apartment lease ended, and I needed to save money. I had a remote job answering support tickets for a company, the kind where you sit at a laptop all day while people yell at you over things you cannot fix. The pay was okay. Not great. But I could technically work from anywhere, and my dad had been asking for a while if I wanted to come stay with him. He lived in West Virginia, rural, quiet, isolated in a way that took some adjustment after living near a busy city intersection where motorcycles would rev past my window at 2 in the morning. At my dad's place, the loudest sound at night was usually bugs or coyotes somewhere deep in the woods behind the property. The house had been my grandparents'. My dad kept it after they passed. I set up in the small spare room near the back, what used to be a sewing room decades ago. There was still a faded square in the carpet, where a heavy table had sat for years. The internet was unreliable. Rain would knock it out sometimes, and I would end up hotspotting my phone just to finish a shift. My dad worked for the county highway department and left early every morning. I would hear his boots on the floor and his truck starting outside before the sun was fully up. Then I would get up around 8:30 and start work. The area had the kind of randomness that rural places have. Tire tracks near the edge of the property sometimes. My dad said people used the dirt road to turn around when their GPEs led them nowhere useful, which happened constantly out there. He knew people who had sheds broken into, tools taken, gas siphoned from vehicles. Random things were not unusual enough to worry about individually. I never felt actually scared there until the day the man showed up. My dad was at work. I was on my lunch break and had taken my laptop outside to the porch because the house felt stuffy. I was eating leftover pasta straight from the container and watching birds near the tree line. Then I saw someone walking up the dirt road toward the property. I did not recognize him. He was older, somewhere in his 40s or 50s maybe. He looked like someone who spent most of his time outside. Not homeless exactly, more like someone who slept in their truck regularly and had stopped worrying about what people thought of that. What was strange was that he was on foot. There was nothing around our property worth walking to. He came into the yard like he already knew the layout of it. That was what caught my attention first. Not hesitation. Not the way someone moves when they are approaching an unfamiliar property. He walked like he had been there before. I stood up automatically when I saw him, and he smiled when he noticed me. He asked if my dad was home. Then, he just stood there. His eyes kept moving in a way that felt disconnected, like he was listening to something the rest of us could not hear, or like his thoughts were running on a separate track from the conversation. Then he asked if I wanted to hang out with him. That was how he said it. No introduction. No explanation for why he was there. Just that. Out of a stranger's mouth in the middle of my dad's yard in the middle of the afternoon. I said no thank you, assuming he would register how strange he sounded and leave. He did not leave. He kept talking. He said he lived nearby. Said he had seen me outside before. That was the moment my stomach dropped, because it meant he had been watching the property at some point without me knowing, and I had no idea when or how many times. I told him I was busy with work and started moving toward the front door. He did not get angry, but his expression shifted in a way I could not name. He muttered something I could not hear. Then he asked if he could come inside for a glass of water. I said no. There was a silence after that where he simply looked at me. His face went flat, like something he had been holding in place, stopped working and fell away. Then the smile came back, wrong in the same way it had been the first time. He said all right, put his hands in his pockets, and walked slowly back down toward the road. I watched him until he disappeared past the trees. Then I went inside and locked the door and texted my dad. I told him some weird guy had come up asking for him and acting creepy. I even put a laughing emoji at the end of the message because I was trying to convince myself it was not as unsettling as it felt. That lull still bothers me when I think about it now. Because I already knew something was wrong. My dad replied and told me to keep the doors locked and call him if the man came back. I went back to work. About 2 hours later, around 2:30, I got up to make coffee. I was standing in the kitchen waiting for the microwave when I heard it. Someone was moving the front door knob. Then the door opened. I had not fully engaged the deadbolt. That realization hit me at the exact same moment I heard footsteps inside the house. Not outside. Inside. I grabbed my phone off the counter and backed into the hallway. I could hear him moving around in the living room area. He was talking to himself, muttering, like a quiet, disjointed conversation that had no beginning and no end. Random words, fragments, nothing that connected into anything I could understand. I backed into my bedroom and locked the door as quietly as I could. Then, I called 911. I whispered everything to the dispatcher because I did not know where he was in the house. She asked me to stay on the line. I listened as carefully as I could while answering her questions. The footsteps moved down the hallway toward my room. They stopped directly outside my bedroom door. I stared at the doorknob and did not breathe. He was still muttering on the other side of the door. Soft. Continuous. Like someone talking in their sleep. The dispatcher was telling me officers were on the way and asking if I could block the door. I pushed a small dresser in front of it. My room was tiny. There was almost nowhere to go. Bed, dresser, lamp, closet. I remember thinking it was the worst possible room to be locked in. The doorknob turned. He was testing it. Then he hit the door hard with his shoulder. The frame shook. Then again harder. I heard myself say, "Please leave." He started shouting on the other side. Something about me being rude. Something about opening the door. Then he kicked it hard enough that the dresser moved. The door was old solid wood, probably original to the house. Heavy enough that it held even under that. But every impact shook the frame, and I did not know how long it would hold. Then he stopped. Footsteps moving away down the hall. Drawers opening in the kitchen. Cabinets slamming. Then the front door opened and closed. I stayed on the floor pressed against the wall for a long time even after I heard the sirens getting closer down the road outside, because I did not know if he was actually gone or waiting just outside the bedroom door for me to come out. My dad arrived before the deputies cleared the property. I have never seen him look like that, like something had come loose inside him. The man had not taken anything. That detail bothered the deputies, because whatever he had wanted when he walked through that door, it was not a burglary. A neighbor farther down the road had seen a dark-colored car parked partially hidden near an abandoned logging trail earlier that afternoon. Backed into the brush deliberately enough that it would not be visible from the road. Police found the car about a mile away. The registration came back to a man with a substantial prior record, which meant none of what happened that afternoon was confusion. It was not someone mentally unwell who had wandered into the wrong house by accident. He had seen me there, alone. And he had made a decision. They searched the area for days, talked to people in town who knew him. Nobody could say where he had gone after he left the car behind. As far as I know, they never found him. There are nights I still think about the sound of that door opening. Not the kicks, not the shouting, just the quiet sound of the door opening when I was standing in the kitchen, and knowing somehow before I had even processed it that it was him. That specific moment is the one that stayed. That is Cole, a person who was living out of their car and asked to stay anonymous, and Haley. 3 people who were in ordinary places doing ordinary things, and found themselves on the other side of something they cannot fully explain and have not fully moved past. If their stories stayed with you, make sure you are subscribed to the Chamber Files right now. New first-hand accounts drop every single week from real people who need someone else to know what happened to them. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. And if something has happened to you, something you saw, something you survived, something nobody around you fully believed, send it to us. The address is thechamberfiles@gmail.com. We read every single submission. We will see you in the next one, if you are still awake.